For 40 years, Clint Eastwood refused to celebrate Christmas. Wouldn't put up a tree, wouldn't buy gifts, wouldn't attend parties, wouldn't even acknowledge the holiday existed. While the rest of the world decorated and celebrated, he worked, treated December 25th like any other day, maybe worse than any other day. People assumed he was just a curmudgeon. Another Hollywood cynic, too cool for sentiment, too tough for tradition. But the truth was darker than that, more painful. The kind of truth that turns a single day into a 40-year wound. Christmas hadn't always been poison to him. At once it had been magic. Once he'd believed in it more than anything. And then on one Christmas Eve when he was 34 years old, everything changed. Something happened that made him swear he'd never celebrate Christmas again. And for 4 decades he kept that promise. Until one night, one Christmas Eve, when he was 74 years old, when something happened that he couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize, couldn't dismiss. Something that broke through 40 years of carefully constructed hatred and showed him what he'd really been running from. This is the story of why Clint Eastwood hated Christmas, and the story of the night that changed everything. To understand what happened that night, you first need to understand what happened 40 years earlier, December 24th, 1974. Clint Eastwood was 34 years old. His career was taking off. He'd recently finished filming and his star was rising. He had a wife he loved, a daughter, almost 3 years old, named Sarah. And Christmas had always been his favorite holiday. Not for religious reasons exactly, though he believed, but for the feeling of it, the warmth, the light in the darkness, the sense that for one day the world tried to be better than it was, kinder, more generous, more hopeful. That Christmas Eve he'd finished work early, come home with gifts hidden in the trunk. His wife had made dinner. Sarah was already in pajamas, bouncing with excitement about Santa coming. They'd planned to read Christmas stories together, then tuck her into bed before assembling her gifts, a dollhouse Clint had been working on for months in the garage. Everything was perfect. The tree was lit. Carols played on the record player. Snow was falling outside. It was the kind of Christmas Eve that Norman Rockwell painted, the kind you remember forever. And then the phone rang. Clint answered it. A hospital. His father had collapsed. Heart attack. They'd brought him to emergency. It didn't look good. He needed to come now. The decision was immediate. His wife would stay with Sarah. He'd go to the hospital. It was only 20 minutes away. His father was strong, had always been strong. This would be fine. He'd get there, his father would be stabilized, and he'd be home by midnight. Inconvenient timing, but manageable. He kissed his wife, hugged his daughter, promised he'd be back soon, got in his car, started driving through the snow toward the hospital. He never made it. A drunk driver ran a red light, hit Clint's car broadside on the passenger side. The impact sent him spinning across an intersection. When his car finally stopped, he was dazed, bruised, but alive, conscious enough to hear the sirens approaching, conscious enough to realize he'd been hit, conscious enough to feel the panic rising. His father was dying, and now he was trapped in a wrecked car while emergency responders tried to extract him. By the time they got him out, checked him over, and confirmed he wasn't seriously injured, 2 hours had passed. He tried to leave, tried to get to his father, but they insisted on observation, protocol, insurance, liability. He argued, raged, finally signed whatever releases they required, and called a cab to take him to the other hospital. He arrived at 11:47 p.m., December 24th, becoming December 25th, Christmas Eve becoming Christmas Day. He rushed through the emergency room doors, asking for his father's room, and he saw the look on the nurse's face, the look that told him everything before she said a word. His father had died 20 minutes earlier, at 11:27 p.m., while Clint was signing paperwork at a different hospital. His father had asked for him, had held on as long as he could, but finally, alone in a hospital room on Christmas Eve, he'd let go. Clint arrived 13 minutes too late to say goodbye. That night destroyed something fundamental in Clint Eastwood. In the days after his father's funeral, Clint tried to process what had happened, tried to make sense of the timing, the accident, the delay, the 13 minutes that separated him from his father's last words. He'd been on his way to the hospital, had dropped everything the moment he got the call, had done everything right, and still he'd failed. The drunk driver had taken those minutes from him. The hospital bureaucracy had taken more, And Christmas had been the backdrop to all of it. The reason his father had been alone. The reason Clint had been rushing. The reason everything had gone wrong. His wife tried to help him see it differently. Accidents happen. Timing is cruel. No one was to blame. But Clint couldn't hear it. All he could hear was the nurse's voice telling him his father had asked for him, had waited as long as he could, had died alone. On Christmas, that first Christmas after, Clint didn't celebrate. Couldn't. The decorations felt obscene. The music felt mocking. The joy felt like an insult to his grief. His wife understood, gave him space. They'd try again next year, she said, when the wound wasn't so fresh. But next year came, and Clint still couldn't do it. The sight of Christmas lights made him angry. The sound of carols made him leave rooms. The cheerful holiday greetings from strangers made him want to scream, because Christmas wasn't cheerful. Christmas was the day his father died alone. Christmas was the drunk driver, and the bureaucracy, and the 13 minutes he'd never get back. His wife tried for a few years, put up a small tree for their daughter, tried to maintain some normalcy. But Clint wouldn't participate, wouldn't acknowledge it. And eventually, worn down by his hostility, she stopped trying. The marriage ended a few years later. Other issues, she said. But Clint knew the truth. He'd let his grief poison everything, and Christmas had been the visible symptom of the invisible wound. The hatred became a pattern. Every December, people would ask about his holiday plans. He'd say he didn't celebrate. They'd ask why, expecting a shrug or a joke. He'd tell them flatly, "My father died on Christmas." That usually ended the conversation. For 40 years, this was his truth. Christmas was death. Christmas was loss. Christmas was the holiday that had stolen his final moments with his father. And he wanted nothing to do with it. But at 74, something changed. Or rather, someone changed it. Clint's grandson, the same Marcus who'd challenged him about prayer, invited him to Christmas Eve dinner. Not a request. Not a suggestion, a challenge. "Grandpa," Marcus said over the phone in early December, "you've been running from Christmas for my entire life. Before my entire life. Since before my dad was born. 40 years of running. Don't you think it's time to stop?" Clint's first instinct was to hang up. His second was to explain again why he didn't celebrate. His third was to recognize that Marcus already knew. Everyone in the family knew. They'd all learned to work around it, to celebrate Christmas without including Clint, to understand that he was broken in this particular way, and nothing would fix it. "I'm not running," Clint said. "I'm just not participating." "That's the same thing," Marcus replied. "Look, I'm not asking you to put up a tree or sing carols. I'm just asking you to come to dinner. Christmas Eve, my place, me, my wife, our kids, your great-grandchildren who've never seen you on Christmas. Just show up, eat with us, be present for a few hours. Can you do that?" Every instinct Clint had screamed no. He'd spent 40 years avoiding exactly this. The forced cheerfulness, the pretense that Christmas was something to celebrate, the pressure to be happy when happiness felt like betrayal. But something in Marcus's voice stopped him from immediately refusing. A challenge, a dare, a suggestion that maybe, after 40 years, fear had become habit, and habit had become identity. "I'll think about it," Clint said. He spent the next 2 weeks thinking about it. Every reason he'd avoided Christmas for 4 decades still applied. The memories were still painful. His father was still dead. The drunk driver had never been caught. The 13 minutes were still lost. Nothing had changed, except maybe Clint had. At 74, he'd lived longer without his father than he'd lived with him. He'd missed 40 Christmases, had pushed away family, had let one horrible night define 4 decades of other nights, had turned grief into identity. And he was tired. Tired of the anger. Tired of the isolation. Tired of being the broken one everyone worked around. On Christmas Eve, against every instinct, Clint got in his car and drove to Marcus's house. He arrived at 6 p.m. The house was bright with lights, decorated without being gaudy. Marcus answered the door, didn't make a big deal about it, didn't congratulate Clint on showing up, just smiled and said, "Thanks for coming, Grandpa. Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the house was warm. A tree in the corner, and stockings on the mantel, Christmas music playing softly, nothing overwhelming, nothing aggressive, just a family celebrating a holiday that meant something to them. Marcus's kids, Clint's great-grandchildren, were there. Two boys, 7 and 9. They knew who Clint was, but barely. He'd kept his distance from family gatherings for so long that he was more legend than grandfather. The old man who didn't do Christmas. The broken one. The ghost. They were shy at first, but kids have a way of breaking through barriers that adults respect. Within 20 minutes, they'd pulled him into a game involving toy cars and elaborate explanations of rules Clint couldn't quite follow. He played along, found himself almost smiling. Dinner was simple. Nothing fancy, but it was together. Marcus and his wife Emma had created something warm here, something that felt like what Christmas was supposed to be before Clint's Christmas had been destroyed. Not commercialized, not performative, just family, together, on a night that meant something. After dinner, after the kids had opened one present each, a Christmas Eve tradition Marcus explained, they settled into the living room. The boys eventually crashed, curled up on the couch. Emma took them to bed. Marcus poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Clint. They sat in silence for a while, the tree lights creating soft shadows, the fire crackling. Outside, snow was falling, just like it had been falling 40 years ago. "Why tonight?" Clint finally asked. "Why push this year?" Marcus took a sip of his drink. "Because I've been thinking about your father, my great-grandfather, the man I never met because he died before Dad was born. And I realized something." He turned to look at Clint directly. "You've spent 40 years being angry that you missed his last moments. But Grandpa, you're missing all these moments right now, with us, with your family, because you're so focused on the 13 minutes you lost that you're losing everything else." The words landed like a blow, but Marcus wasn't done. "And I think your father would be devastated to know that his death made you hate the holiday he loved, that his last moments became your permanent prison, that trying to get to him cost you 40 years of Christmas with everyone else." Clint felt something crack open inside him, something he'd been keeping sealed for 4 decades. "You don't understand," Clint said, but his voice was rough. "I was 13 minutes late. 13 minutes, he asked for me. He died alone." "He died in a hospital with nurses," Marcus said gently. "He wasn't alone. And, Grandpa, you know what I think? I think he held on as long as he could because he wanted to tell you something, wanted you to know something. And when you didn't make it, I think he trusted that you'd figure it out eventually." "Figure what out?" "That he loved you, that he was proud of you, that he didn't want his death to destroy your life, that he'd want you to keep celebrating Christmas, to keep finding joy, to keep living." Clint's eyes were burning. "You don't know what he wanted." "No," Marcus agreed, "but I know what he wouldn't want. He wouldn't want you to spend 40 years in prison because of 13 minutes. He wouldn't want his death to kill Christmas for you. He wouldn't want you to miss your great-grandchildren's Christmases because you're stuck on that one night." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and Clint sat with the truth he'd been running from for 40 years. He hadn't been honoring his father by hating Christmas. He'd been punishing himself for the drunk driver he couldn't control, for the accident he couldn't prevent, for the 13 minutes he couldn't get back. He'd taken his guilt and his grief and his rage, and he'd aimed it at Christmas, made it the villain, made it the enemy. But Christmas hadn't killed his father, and hating Christmas hadn't brought him back. It had just created more loss, more absence, more empty chairs at family tables. "I don't know how to stop," Clint said quietly. "I've been angry for so long." "You don't have to stop being angry," Marcus said. "You just have to stop letting it be the only thing. You can miss your father and still celebrate Christmas. You can grieve his death and still find joy. You can hold both, the loss and the life, the grief and the celebration. You don't have to choose." And then something happened that Clint couldn't explain. It was nearly midnight. Marcus had gone to check on the boys. Clint sat alone in the living room, staring at the tree, and he felt it, a presence, something in the room that hadn't been there before. Not threatening, not dramatic, just present. And in his mind, or maybe in his heart, he couldn't tell which, he heard his father's voice. Not actually heard it, but felt it, knew it, recognized it after 40 years. "I'm not angry at you, son. That's all." Just that. The words he'd needed to hear 40 years ago. The words he'd assumed he'd never get. The forgiveness he'd never thought to ask for. The release he'd been seeking in all the wrong ways. "I'm not angry at you for missing the final moments. for arriving 13 minutes late, for living when his father died, for being unable to save him, for all of it. I'm not angry at you. Tears came then, real tears, the kind Clint hadn't allowed himself in 40 years. Not sad tears, not happy tears, something else. Release tears, freedom tears, the kind that come when you finally put down a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot it was a choice to carry it. Marcus came back into the room, saw Clint crying, didn't ask, just sat beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, waited. I think, Clint said finally, his voice broken. I think he was here. Just now. I think he wanted me to know he's not angry. That he never was. Marcus nodded. I think so too. They sat together until the clock struck midnight. Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, just like it had 40 years ago. But this time, instead of arriving too late to say goodbye, Clint was arriving just in time to say hello again, to come back, to stop running, to choose life over grief. Clint didn't leave Marcus's house that night, slept on the couch, woke up Christmas morning to his great-grandchildren jumping on him, excited to show him the presents Santa had brought. He got up, drank coffee with Marcus and Emma, watched the boys play, felt something he hadn't felt on Christmas in 40 years. Not happiness, exactly. Not the erasure of loss, but something else. Permission. Permission to be sad about his father and joyful about his great-grandchildren. Permission to miss what he'd lost and celebrate what he had. Permission to hold both grief and joy without letting one destroy the other. In the weeks after, people noticed the change. Clint mentioned Christmas without bitterness, sent cards, even to everyone's shock put up a small tree in his home, not because he had to, not to prove anything, but because it was time, because 40 years was enough, because his father wouldn't have wanted his death to kill his son's joy. That next Christmas, Clint hosted, invited the whole family, made it an annual tradition, created new memories while honoring old ones. He put a picture of his father by the tree, not as a shrine to grief, but as a reminder that love doesn't end with death, that celebration doesn't dishonor loss, that Christmas can hold both the memory of who's gone and the presence of who's here. People sometimes ask what changed, how he went from 40 years of hatred to celebrating again. He'd tell them about Marcus's challenge, about the Christmas Eve at his grandson's house, about sitting in that living room and feeling his father's presence, about hearing or feeling or knowing the words that freed him. I'm not angry at you. But there was more to it than that. Something harder to explain. The realization that he'd been trying to honor his father by suffering, by refusing joy, by treating Christmas as a memorial to loss rather than a celebration of love. And that his father, the man who'd loved Christmas, who'd made it magical for young Clint, would have been heartbroken to know that his death had killed his son's Christmas for 40 years. The drunk driver never was caught. The 13 minutes were never recovered. His father was still dead. None of the facts changed. But Clint's relationship to those facts changed. He stopped trying to punish himself for things he couldn't control. Stopped using Christmas as the vessel for his grief. Started letting it be what it was meant to be, a night when light shines in darkness, when family gathers, when love is celebrated even in the face of loss. At 94, 20 years after that transformative Christmas Eve, Clint still celebrates, still hosts, still puts his father's picture by the tree. And sometimes late on Christmas Eve, sitting alone after everyone's gone to bed, he'll pour 2 glasses of whiskey, drink one and leave one by his father's picture. A toast to the man who gave him Christmas in childhood, who he tried to honor through hatred and finally learned to honor through joy. 40 years of running. One night of stopping. That's all it took. One night of allowing himself to be present, to feel, to receive the forgiveness he'd never asked for but desperately needed, to hear the words that freed him from a prison of his own making. He hated Christmas for 40 years, until one night when he learned that grief and joy aren't enemies, that you can miss someone and still celebrate, that honoring the dead doesn't require killing your own life, that Christmas can hold both the absence of who's gone and the presence of who's here, and that sometimes the people we've lost speak to us, not in dramatic ways, not in ways we can prove or explain, but in the quiet moments when we finally stop running long enough to listen, when we finally allow ourselves to be loved by the living and forgiven by the dead. That's what Clint Eastwood learned. That's what changed, not on a Damascus road, not in a burning bush, but in his grandson's living room on Christmas Eve, in the space between grief and joy, in the permission to hold both, in the realization that 40 years was enough, that it was time to come home, that his father had been waiting all along to say the words Clint needed to hear. "I'm not angry at you, son. I never was. Now stop punishing yourself and live." Merry Christmas.